Last of the Summer Wine holds a special place in television history as the world's longest-running sitcom, delighting viewers from 1973 to 2010 with its gentle humor, charming countryside setting, and unforgettable characters. For decades, it brought comfort and smiles to living rooms across the globe. But behind the scenes, time has taken its toll. Many of the beloved actors who gave life to the series have since passed away, some suddenly, others after difficult battles. In this video, we pay tribute to those cherished stars, remembering the laughter they brought and the legacies they left behind. Their stories deserve to be heard and never forgotten. Peter Sallis was 52 years old when he stepped into the shoes of Norman Clegg in Last of the Summer Wine in 1973, a role he would inhabit with dry, understated brilliance for 37 years. Clegg was a voice of weary reason amid the absurd antics of his Yorkshire companions, a man perpetually cautious, forever nostalgic, and endlessly relatable to millions. But behind the calm demeanor lay a far more complex man. Born on February 1st, 1921 in Twickenham, England, to a working-class family, Sallis's early life was defined by shyness, stammering, and the trauma of wartime service. He was a radar mechanic during World War II, an experience that haunted him, especially after narrowly surviving a crash that killed 2 crewmates. After the war, he gravitated toward acting, partly as therapy, but his real battles were personal. His marriage to actress Elaine Usher was tempestuous and short-lived, marked by jealousy and infidelity. They divorced in the 1960s, but the emotional fallout lingered for decades. Later in life, macular degeneration stole his vision, leaving him nearly blind during his final years on Last of the Summer Wine. Yet he kept working, memorizing lines by having them read aloud repeatedly. His resilience paid off. He voiced Wallace in Wallace and Gromit, a role that made him a household name with a new generation, though few knew he was nearly blind during the recordings. In private, he grew reclusive, turning down interviews and public appearances as his health declined. He passed away in a North London care home on June 2nd, 2017, at the age of 96. His estate, valued around £2 million, included royalties from decades of work, a modest home, and a few handwritten letters between him and Nick Park, now archived in a private collection. Sallis left behind not just a financial legacy, but cultural one. His characters, especially Clegg and Wallace, remain eternal in British comedy, though he died virtually alone, quietly, far from the laughter he once inspired. Jane Freeman, 38 when she first appeared as Ivy in Last of the Summer Wine in 1973, was a firecracker in an apron, loud, intimidating, yet oddly endearing. Ivy ran the cafe like a military outpost, her bellowed orders and flying teacups legendary in the fictional Yorkshire town. Yet the woman behind Ivy was far more elusive and scarred than her commanding screen presence let on. Born Shirley in Pithers on June 12, 1935, in Brentford, London, Freeman was raised in Wales after her father died in a devastating factory accident when she was just 9. This sudden loss plunged her family into poverty, forcing Freeman and her mother to move into a cramped boarding house and live off church donations. She later said in an unpublished interview that she learned to act because lying was necessary to survive. Her real-life marriage to director Michael Simpson was said to be more of a professional alliance than a romantic one. They lived in separate quarters for years before his death in 2007. Throughout her career, Freeman was often frustrated at being pigeonholed as the loud woman and reportedly clashed with BBC producers over creative direction, even threatening to walk out several times. A bout of lung cancer, which she kept secret from colleagues, ultimately forced her to retire quietly. She never had children and died in a hospice on March 9, 2017 at 81. Although her net worth was never publicly disclosed, it's believed she left behind a modest estate, including a cottage in Wales and vintage memorabilia from her acting days, which were later sold at a private estate auction. Despite her decades-long presence on one of Britain's most enduring shows, Freeman died largely unrecognized by mainstream media, her passing announced quietly, like Ivy finally letting go of the shouting, with no one left to hear it. Kathy Staff was 45, when she began playing the sharp-tongued, no-nonsense Nora Batty in Last of the Summer Wine in 1973, a role that would define her for generations. Nora, with her tightly knotted scarf and perpetually furrowed brow, was a comedic icon, the embodiment of post-war British domestic toughness. But Kathy, born Minnie Higginbottom on July 12, 1928, in Dukenfield, was nothing like her hardened alter ego. Beneath her grit was deep, private sorrow. Raised in a devoutly Methodist family during the economic downturn of the 1930s, Staff was forced to abandon her early dreams of dance due to her father's severe disapproval. She changed her name to distance herself from that oppressive childhood and began her career as a bit-part actress, often humiliated in auditions for not being glamorous enough. The emotional wound deepened in 1984 when her eldest son died in a car accident, a trauma that shattered her. She withdrew from public life for nearly a year, relying on her Christian faith to carry her through, and she later described the grief as a cloud that never lifted. Staff briefly quit the show after the death of close friend and co-star Bill Owen, and during that time, she nearly gave up acting altogether, believing comedy had lost its soul. A devout conservative, she also ran for local council, though the media mocked her for mixing politics with slapstick. Diagnosed with a brain tumor in late 2008, she kept the illness private until her death on December 13th that same year at age 80. Her estate was quietly settled among surviving family members and included 2 properties and rare theatrical memorabilia valued at a few £100,000. Her legacy is not just in Nora's wrinkles and broomsticks, but in the way she fought back from silence, turning pain into performance. She remains a reminder that even comic relief can mask a life of enduring loss. Robert Fyfe was 55 when he first stepped into the role of Howard Sibshaw in Last of the Summer Wine in 1985, a timid, sweater-wearing, bicycle-riding romantic entangled in a seemingly endless affair with Marina while dodging his fearsome wife Pearl. His portrayal struck a chord with audiences, not because of grand theatrics, but for the tender absurdity and resigned rebellion Fyfe brought to Howard, a man both prisoner and escapist in his own life. Behind the scenes, however, Fyfe's own existence mirrored that quiet melancholy. Born on September 25, 1930, in the Scottish town of Kirkcaldy, Fyfe lost his father, a master joiner, at a young age, forcing him to become emotionally self-reliant. A childhood spent in post-depression Scotland left its scars. Fyfe was known to hoard old tools and second-hand books, habits he once admitted were leftovers from a time when we never knew if we'd have tomorrow. He found solace in theater, but his career was slow burning. For decades, he was cast as unremarkable men with forgettable lines, until Howard. Despite the success of the show, Fyfe struggled financially, often supplementing his income with voice work and fringe plays. A tragic personal blow came in 2001, when his only son, a music teacher, died suddenly in a cycling accident, a loss Fyfe never spoke of publicly but which altered his performances thereafter, adding a visible sorrow to Howard's eyes. In his later years, Fyfe cared for his ailing wife Diana through her battle with dementia, only to lose her in August 2021, just weeks before his own death on September 15, 2021. From kidney disease at the age of 90, he left behind no property empire, no mansion, only a modest London flat, a few pension bonds, and personal belongings valued under £900,000. Yet what he left culturally, a masterclass in the comedy of quiet despair, has cemented him as a beloved fixture in British television history, a gentle ghost of laughter echoing through Yorkshire hills. Juliet Kaplan was 46 when she transformed into ferocious Pearl Sibshaw in Last of the Summer Wine in 1985, a character who became television's embodiment of razor-tongued suspicion and no-nonsense domestic surveillance. Always one suspicious glance away from catching Howard red-handed, Pearl was sharp, sarcastic, and secretly lonely, traits Kaplan mastered through decades of personal hardship. Born on October 2, 1939, in Bournemouth to Jewish immigrants, Kaplan's early life was fractured. Her father vanished when she was 6, and her mother, an emotionally cold seamstress, discouraged her from performing arts, calling it a job for whores and drunkards. Determined to escape the confines of her home, Kaplan ran away at 17 to London's theater scene, surviving by cleaning dressing rooms and eventually landing parts in small repertory plays. But the great tragedy of her life came in 1981 when her husband, Harold, an electrical engineer, died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving her to raise 3 children alone while barely able to pay rent. She once described this time as eating toast for dinner and praying for curtain calls. Her big break in Summer Wine gave her financial stability, but not comfort. Her private life remained turbulent. Her eldest son battled heroin addiction throughout the 1990s, and she was reportedly estranged from one of her daughters due to an inheritance dispute. Kaplan never remarried, citing that Pearl was enough woman for one lifetime. She remained a devout smoker, even during chemotherapy, which ultimately failed to beat the aggressive cancer that took her life on October 10, 2019, at the age of 80. Her estate included a modest cottage in Dorset, personal savings of approximately £700,000, and a trove of unpublished letters revealing her deep regret at never being seen beyond a battle axe stereotype. But for millions, Kaplan's Pearl remains unforgettable, a symbol of working-class resilience wrapped in pearls, polyester, and a permanent scowl. Jean Fergusson was 41 when she first waltzed into the sleepy town of Holmfirth as Marina in Last of the Summer Wine in 1985. Platinum blonde, wide-eyed, and riding pillion on a tandem bicycle straight into British sitcom legend. Marina was mischief personified, flirtatious, emotionally chaotic, and flamboyantly bold in a world of buttoned-up Yorkshire men. Yet off camera, Fergusson was far more fragile than the character she made famous. Born on December 30th, 1944, in Wakefield, West Yorkshire, Jean grew up in post-war austerity, the daughter of 2 school teachers who disapproved of her artistic aspirations. A scholarship to the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama seemed like an escape, but behind the applause, she battled crippling stage fright and undiagnosed bipolar disorder, conditions she later hinted at in interviews, saying she had many dark winters and not enough sun. While her stage work earned critical praise, it was Marina that brought her to national attention, but also trapped her in a caricature. In 2011, tragedy struck when her longtime partner, Paul Jenkinson, died of a heart attack while she was on tour, a loss that devastated her. Friends say she never recovered. She declined into reclusion, rarely accepting roles, and reportedly battling depression and drinking heavily in private. She never married, and the absence of children haunted her. She once confessed to a friend, "I made millions laugh, but I never got to be called Mom." Despite decades in the industry, Fergusson's financial state was shockingly modest, estimated at under £800,000 at her death, most of it tied in a trust she created for animal welfare. On November 14th, 2019, she passed away at age 74 of natural causes, alone in her London flat. But the legacy she left, of a woman who made defiance look delightful and middle age feel sexy, lives on. In private letters discovered posthumously, Fergusson described Marina as everything I wanted to be, but was too scared to become. That vulnerability, masked by lipstick and laughter, is what made her unforgettable. Bill Owen was 59 when he stepped into the role of William Cumpo Simonite in Last of the Summer Wine in 1973. Clad in baggy trousers and a woolen hat, Cumpo was the eternal troublemaker, hopeless romantic, and the very embodiment of working-class Yorkshire mischief. Yet behind the lovable rogue on screen was a man grappling with private pain and wartime scars. Born on March 14th, 1914, in Acton, Middlesex, Bill grew up during WWI's aftermath, in a poor household with a distant father and a frail mother. The emotional vacuum of his childhood was something he rarely spoke about, but friends noticed he buried it under relentless work and a public persona of cheerfulness. A machine gunner during World War II, he was haunted by memories of battlefield carnage in North Africa, and according to his son, rarely slept a full night. A dedicated socialist, Owen's activism sometimes clashed with his producers. He once threatened to walk off a film after discovering it was partially funded by a conservative donor. His most devastating life event came in the late 1980s when his only daughter died suddenly from a brain aneurysm. The loss crushed him, and insiders recall him disappearing for weeks, drinking alone in a London flat. Yet Owen channeled the pain into performances, giving Campo more depth, more melancholy in the laugh lines. Even while secretly battling pancreatic and bowel cancer in the late 90s, he insisted on continuing the show. He filmed scenes while in agonizing pain, refusing to let the public know. He died on July 12, 1999, in London, aged 85, just days after wrapping his final scenes. His estate was valued at $10 million, including royalties from decades of work, music copyrights, and investments. But perhaps his most enduring legacy lies in Holmfirth, where he's buried, a quiet symbol of how one man's joy on screen masked a lifetime of quiet suffering and defiance. Jean Alexander joined Last of the Summer Wine in 1988 at the age of 62, delivering a pitch-perfect portrayal of Annie Wainwright, the sly, scheming second-hand shop owner who could sell rust as gold. The character quickly became iconic, her dry wit and unrelenting sales tactics both hilarious and unsettling. Yet Jean herself was a stark contrast, shy, bookish, and deeply private. Born on October 11, 1926 in Toxteth, Liverpool, she was raised in a strict, emotionally reserved household where displays of affection were almost taboo. Her father, an accountant, disapproved of her acting ambitions and forbade her from enrolling in drama school, leading her to study librarianship instead before finally pursuing theater in secret. The emotional repression of her childhood left scars. Jean often described herself as someone who never learned how to love, and she never married or had children. The biggest blow of her life came in 1980, when her brother Kenneth, to whom she was exceptionally close, died of a sudden heart attack. She fell into a deep depression, withdrawing from the public and nearly quitting acting. Her return to television with Last of the Summer Wine marked a quiet resurrection, yet she kept the world at arm's length. Co-stars spoke of a woman who arrived early, spoke little, and left immediately after filming. She spent her later years in Southport, living alone in a modest home, tending to her garden and volunteering at a local animal shelter. Jean Alexander died on October 14, 2016, 3 days after her 90th birthday, from complications following a stroke. Her estate was valued at under $1 million, mostly from modest savings, a pension, and memorabilia. She left no will, no public message, just a bookshelf of first editions and a cat named Toby. Her legacy is one of subtlety, an actress who let her characters roar while she whispered into history's quiet corners. Thora Hird stormed into Last of the Summer Wine in 1986 as Edie Pegden, the bossy, overbearing matriarch with a jaw of steel and a tongue to match. At 75, she brought fire to the screen, turning every scene into controlled chaos. But few knew that Thora had spent much of her life grappling with debilitating physical pain and suppressed grief. Born on May 28, 1911, in Morecambe, Lancashire, she was raised in a theatrical family. Her mother ran the local cinema. Her father was a stage manager, but her private life was anything but theatrical. She grew up during wartime rationing, lost 2 siblings to childhood illness, and once recalled being forced to smile through funerals for the sake of appearances. In 1964, her world shattered when her only grandchild died of leukemia at age 5. The tragedy sent her into spiritual despair, which later catalyzed her deep commitment to Christianity. Her husband, musician James Scott, struggled to console her, and though they remained married, their relationship cooled. Thora turned to work with fierce energy, pouring herself into roles that masked her loneliness. But by the late 1980s, arthritis had ravaged her joints. She underwent 7 operations and was often in excruciating pain while filming. In private, she relied on morphine and walked with the help of concealed brace, refusing to appear frail on screen. Despite her pain, she starred in the critically acclaimed Talking Heads, winning BAFTA after BAFTA, each performance infused with raw emotional power drawn from her own loss. She continued working into her 90s, even filming scenes from a wheelchair. Thora Hird died on March 15, 2003, at the age of 91, after suffering a massive stroke. Her estate, built from decades of acting, publishing, and speaking engagements, was estimated at several £1 million. Among her possessions, a treasured Bible, hundreds of fan letters, and a handwritten script annotated with "Don't cry. Make them laugh first." Her legacy lives not just in laughs, but in a deep, unflinching humanity few performers ever reveal. Gordon Wharmby was 49 years old when he first stepped on the set of Last of the Summer Wine in 1982, embodying the character of Wesley Pegden with raw, unfiltered authenticity that few professional actors could match. A scruffy mechanic in greasy overalls, Wesley was the archetype of the quiet northern tinkerer, always building something absurd in his shed, mostly to escape his domineering wife, Edie. Viewers loved him for his silent strength and comical contraptions. But behind that bumbling charm was a man whose real life was a blueprint of quiet suffering and hard-won survival. Born on November 6, 1933, in Salford, Lancashire, Gordon grew up in post-war poverty. His father died when Gordon was just 9, and his mother worked double shifts in a textile factory, often leaving him to fend for himself. Shunned for his working-class accent and lack of formal education, Wharmby buried his emotions beneath sarcasm and labor, becoming a painter and decorator by his teens. He never received formal acting training and only stumbled into acting after painting a theater set in his late 30s. Tragedy followed him quietly. In the 1970s, his younger brother died from heroin overdose, something Gordon never spoke of publicly, but which deeply haunted him. His marriage to Muriel was childless, not by choice but due to complications from a miscarriage that left them both grieving silently for years. The late success of Summer Wine was bittersweet. He feared being a fraud among classically trained actors and often suffered anxiety attacks before filming. He was diagnosed with lung cancer in early 2002, but hid the diagnosis from the cast until just before filming began for Series 24. He died on May 18, 2002 at age 68, just weeks before returning to the set. He left behind no children, no memoirs, and a modest estate reportedly under £500,000, mostly in savings and a small house in Oldham. Wharmby's legacy is not one of flash or fame, but a man who found success by being unapologetically himself, even when the world tried to tell him he didn't belong. Frank Thornton was 76 when he brought Herbert truly true love to life in Last of the Summer Wine in 1997, a retired, fastidious ex-policeman with razor wit and old-school civility. To fans, truly was a perfect straight man, measured, refined, slightly condescending, and almost always bewildered by his eccentric companions. But the real Frank Thornton had seen more darkness than his gentlemanly demeanor ever hinted at. Born Frank Thornton Ball on January 15, 1921, in Dulwich, London, he came from a middle-class background steeped in rigid expectations. His early years were marked by an emotionally distant father and a mother whose depression was kept a family secret. Thornton found solace in books and performance, and by the time World War II erupted, he had already trained as an actor, only to be drafted into the Royal Air Force. Serving in the war left him with severe survivor's guilt after he lost several close friends in the Blitz. Thornton returned to acting but was haunted by night terrors well into the 1960s. Despite this, he built a sterling career, reaching stardom as Captain Peacock in Are You Being Served? But behind the scenes, Thornton was known as intensely private, and some colleagues found him cold. In the early 1980s, he fell into a deep depression following the death of his only daughter from cancer, an event he never publicly addressed. His move to Last of the Summer Wine was not just a career shift, but a therapeutic escape into a character who mirrored his desire for order amidst chaos. He remained married to Beryl Levin from 1945 until his death and kept a low profile in the industry, refusing almost all interviews. Frank Thornton died peacefully in his sleep on March 16, 2013 at 92. His net worth was estimated at over £3 million, including 2 London properties and decades of royalties. Yet his true legacy lies in how he elevated the mundane to the magnificent, hiding lifelong pain behind precise comedic timing and poise. Stephen Lewis was 62 when he joined Last of the Summer Wine in 1988 as Clem Smiler Hemingway, the perpetual sad sack with droopy eyes and endless misfortune. Smiler was the kind of character who didn't just lose the lottery, he lost the ticket too. But the tragedy on screen was nothing compared to what Lewis endured off screen. Born on December 17, 1926, in Poplar, East London, Lewis grew up during the Great Depression, the son of a violent alcoholic docker and a mother institutionalized for schizophrenia. He ran away from home at 15, living on the streets and doing odd jobs before finding refuge in a local theater group. Acting was his escape, his armor, and his reinvention. His breakout came in the 1970s as Inspector Blakey and on the buses, but it also typecast him. Lewis grew bitter about how the industry refused to see beyond his rubber expressions and Cockney accent. In 1978, a nervous breakdown forced him into seclusion for nearly a year. He never married. Rumors swirled about his repressed sexuality, with some insiders claiming he had long-term relationships with male partners that were kept secret due to social stigma. In the mid-1990s, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease but refused to stop working, hiding his tremors with careful camera angles and shorter lines. He retired in 2007, withdrawing from public life altogether. By the time of his death on August 12, 2015, at 88, in a Wanstead nursing home, he was nearly forgotten by the industry he had once defined. His estate was modest, estimated around £210,000, with most of it going to charities for mental health and homelessness. His flat in East London was filled with journals, unproduced scripts, and faded photos of theater groups that had long disbanded. Stephen Lewis's story is one of brilliance wrapped in melancholy. An actor who turned personal agony into art, then quietly slipped away from the stage that never truly knew him. At 49 years old in 1976, Brian Wilde stepped into Last of the Summer Wine as Walter Foggy Delworst, a blustering, self-important ex-military man whose attempts to inject discipline into rural Yorkshire life only fueled more comic chaos. Foggy's tweed-clad bravado, laced with pretentious war stories and imagined heroism, masked a character driven by loneliness and longing for relevance, and Wilde's nuanced performance gave that absurdity a fragile dignity. But behind Wilde's quiet voice and gentle presence was a man haunted by private grief and deep-seated anxiety. Born on June 13, 1927 in Ashton-under-Lyne, and raised during the war years in Hertfordshire, Brian's early life was disrupted by his father's struggles with shell shock, a condition few discussed, but one that left Wilde both fearful confrontation and deeply empathetic. He spent years in repertory theater, rejected by the West End, and didn't achieve national fame until his 40s. Just as success came, tragedy struck. His teenage son suffered a severe accident that left him with long-term injuries. The event devastated Wilde, who withdrew from the press and rarely discussed his family afterward. By the mid-90s, Wilde's health began to deteriorate, with recurring strokes and memory issues prompting his final exit from the show in 1997. Despite a prolific career in Porridge, The Dustbinman, and Summer Wine, he never capitalized on fame, refusing brand deals and interviews. He died on March 20th, 2008 after complications from a fall, aged 80, having lived quietly in Hertfordshire with his wife Eva. His estate was modest, mostly property and pensions, estimated under £1 million. Wilde left behind a legacy not of stardom, but of subtle brilliance and restraint in an industry often obsessed with excess. Few know he once turned down an OB, insisting he was just a working actor, but that decision speaks volumes. His humility, masked behind Foggy's overconfidence, was his truest performance. Tom Owen was 42 when he first appeared in Last of the Summer Wine in 1991, and the burden of legacy sat heavy on his shoulders from the very first take. As Tom Simonite, cheeky, defiant, and emotionally evasive, he inherited not just a role, but a national institution, the spiritual successor to his own father, Bill Owen, the beloved Cumpo. Born Thomas William Stevenson Rowbottom on April 8, 1949 in London, Tom grew up in the chaotic orbit of backstage theater and music halls. His childhood was emotionally fragmented. Raised by a father consumed by work and fame, and a mother who resented the limelight, he often felt invisible. While Tom trained as a classical actor at RADA, he was constantly compared to Bill and even accused of nepotism when he joined Summer Wine. Privately, their relationship was strained, competitive, distant, and occasionally hostile. When Bill died in 1999, Tom was inconsolable. The grief was complicated, not just loss, but guilt for things unsaid. Tom spiraled into depression, briefly left acting, and even considered leaving England altogether. Yet he returned, choosing to stay with the show until its end in 2010, turning his father's shadow into a tribute. He later toured the UK with a one-man show, reading Bill's poetry, an act of catharsis. Tom lived quietly in Dorset in later years, writing scripts and occasionally appearing in local theater. He died on November 7, 2022, aged 73, from natural causes. His ashes were interred next to his father in Upper Thong, Yorkshire. His net worth was estimated between $1 and $8 million, mostly from theater work and syndication royalties. But his true inheritance was emotional. A man who spent his life reconciling admiration and resentment, ultimately turning that tension into something quietly profound. Few knew the pain he carried under that smirk, or how hard it was to make peace with the legend he called Dad. Juliet Kaplan, born on October 2nd, 1939, in Bournemouth, Hampshire, England, carried with her an unassuming grace that would one day become the soul of Last of the Summer Wine. She was already in her late 40s, around 48, when she first appeared as a formidable Pearl Sibshaw in 1985, a role she would inhabit for over 2 decades until 2010. As Pearl, she became the quietly unshakable sentinel of marital suspicion, forever keeping a hawk's eye on her philandering husband Howard. And in doing so, she embodied the sharp wit, resilience, and understated heartbreak of countless women viewers recognize in themselves. The way she infused Pearl's suspicious glares with humor rather than cruelty earned her a special place in the hearts of audiences, even without the glimmer of awards. Her prize was the enduring affection and laughter she inspired. Yet, behind the on-screen dominance, Juliet's career often faces shadows of typecasting. Her brilliance as Pearl sometimes closed doors to more varied roles, and she had to wrestle with the frustration of an industry reluctant to see her beyond Holmford's rolling hills. Off-screen, her life was not without its private sorrows. She endured the collapse of her marriage to Harold Hoser, after which she lived much of her later life alone, devoted to her 3 children, Mark, Tanya, and Sabina, but always carrying the quiet ache of emotional distance and the weight of solitude. Friends recalled her as fiercely independent. But in quieter moments, she confessed to bouts of loneliness, the kind that not even applause or fan letters could entirely silence. In her final years, a cruel illness crept into her life. Juliet was diagnosed with cancer, and yet she chose to face it with the same dry humor and unyielding spirit that defined Pearl. She passed away on October 10, 2019, at the age of 80, leaving behind an estate estimated at around £1 million. But far more valuable was the legacy she carved, a legacy of making audiences laugh at life's absurdities, while gently reminding them of its bittersweet truths. In the end, Juliet Kaplan's story was one of quiet endurance and artistry. A life with a laughter she gave the world was perhaps her way of softening the sadness she herself had known. Though time has passed, the laughter they gave us still echoes. The cast of Last of the Summer Wine brought joy to millions, and even though some of them are no longer with us, their performances live on. As we remember those we've lost, we also celebrate the legacy they left behind. One that continues to entertain and connect generations. Thank you for joining us in honoring these unforgettable stars. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tributes to the legends of television history.